Welcome to Ride Success, the podcast that takes you on a learning journey to a more productive, creative, and active life. Today, I had the massive honor of chatting with Dame Sarah Storey. She's Britain's most decorated Paralympian, a beacon of resilience and ambition. From early beginnings in swimming to dominating the world of cycling, Dame Sarah Storey's journey is a testament to what it means to push the boundaries of human potential. Beyond their athletic prowess, a role as an active travel advocate and their unwavering dedication to promoting cycling and active travel in Greater Manchester showcases her commitment to making a tangible difference in the community. As she gears up for her 9th Paralympic Games, Dame Sarah Storey's narrative is not just about the medals and records. It's a profound story of balancing life as a working mum, athlete, and change maker, inspiring us all to redefine our own versions of success. Join me in this learning journey to discover the mind of a true champion, exploring the drive, dedication, and determination that fuels our quest for excellence and societal impact. But before we get into the podcast, ladies and gentlemen, please subscribe to wherever you listen to this podcast. It helps us to grow the podcast, bring amazing guests to you, and keep on this learning journey. Now, back to the podcast. Welcome, Sarah Storey, to Ride Success. It's a huge honor to having you on the podcast.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
So, kind of your legacy extends, in my opinion, far beyond the medals and the records you achieved. I think it's found in your advocacy work, in your barrier-breaking performances, as well as your role in being inspirational to many, including myself. And I wanted to start this conversation by picking something that you mentioned in the past that I think is quite important and perhaps will be a thread in our conversation, which reads like this. When you're close to reaching your potential, and none of us ever know when that will be, the gains you make are smaller and smaller. So you have to make logical adjustments. So I think this is quite important, and there's a lot to kind of unpack here in this just short few sentences, because throughout your career and your life, you have faced and overcome many challenges. And I want to kind of understand a bit more what is the driving force behind your commitment to being the best?
Oh, well, great question. I think it's the curiosity of where that best is. I think curiosity takes most people, most places. You're curious about something, so you investigate what it means, from being, a toddler in a preschool right the way through your school days, your curiosity to learn something new. And so for me, it's the curiosity of just what my body's capable of, what my mind's capable of, and also how I can translate that to other parts, other parts of my life and other people's lives, I suppose, because it's not always about, high performance in a sporting situation. It could be high performance, in the business world and corporate world, or back in a school situation as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, you have mentioned in the past that people, when they look at your successes, or when people look at your successes, they look at highs, they look at the record-breaking performances, and they don't look, and they don't know perhaps of what is behind that. Perhaps the struggle, perhaps the day in and day out work ethic that you have.
Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting from you, kind of your personal life. How do you keep this balance? Because you mentioned you're curious in stretching the kind of the possibilities and seeing where is the maximum potential in certain facets of your life. How do you balance this in working in local government, working as an athlete, as a business manager? How do you manage this situation?
I think every environment that you're in has different boundaries set by that particular particular environment. So there's, for example, in a local government situation, there's layers of work that has to be done around decisions. They have to involve different numbers of people, elected people who are making the decisions. You work with those people because they are the elected members with the responsibility. Or you go into a workplace environment and you're working with the leaders to eke out the small marginal gains that might be of assistance to them as individuals or to their teams.
Yeah.
And you're providing constant kind of, I suppose it's examples of how resilience is required, because like you say, you don't see the day in, day out. Like, you haven't seen the fact today that it was so windy, I had to ride up and down the same 20-kilometre stretch of road because it was a headwind one way, a tailwind the other way, and a crosswind would literally have taken me off my bike. So the choice was to train or not to train, and that was the only way to train safely. And I think those sorts of decisions, how you come to those decisions and how you create a mindset that deals with the monotony. And I guess for me as a swimmer previously, I have a huge bank of resilience and in monotony because I used to follow a black line for a living. But how do you translate that into another environment and recreate that in a situation whereby you need your workforce to be productive regardless of the environment they're presented with? And so I find that those are the sorts of challenges that allow you to bring high performance into other areas, but with that caveat that they will also create their own boundaries that need to be adjusted sensitively, because people fear change, people struggle with change quite profoundly. Change is quite scary. And I think one of the things I'm probably most proud of is that I've always faced change as an opportunity rather than as something to fear.
Yeah, that's a very interesting kind of position, because that's your mindset. It's very perhaps it's I dare to say almost is uncommon in most people, because change is inherently frightening. You don't want to leave your comfort zone, and you do that for a living.
Yeah.
Pushing yourself.
I guess it's how you frame that change as well, though, and how if you're in control of what you can control within that change. So if someone is inflicting a change upon you that is, as an athlete, you're constantly having to navigate and pick out the people who are trying to inflict unnecessary change, be that, through decisions that are made that you don't have control over. How do you regain control to enable that change to pass through more easily, or to embrace it in a way that makes sense to you as an individual? Not everyone has the authority to do that, which is a challenge, but we all have control of something. And I think identifying what we do have control over is probably the first step to creating a process that you feel happy with. And that, most people struggle with the idea that they aren't in control of something. Once they find which bit they are in control of, suddenly the stress levels reduce and they have a purpose again to follow that part that they have control over. And I think once you have a plan, then you can enact it and you feel like you're in control of that change. It's less daunting.
So is that how you? I think you just revealed to us, to me and to the people that perhaps are listening, that it kind of how you prepare to, for instance, for major competitions, where is that how you do it? You kind of compartmentalize the parts or elements that you can't control, and you prepare as best as you can to be the best shape possible, to be the equipment that you have in the best condition possible. And then perhaps factors that you can't control, like the weather, like the other competitors, external factors, like you said. Is that how you do it
exactly
as you prepare for competitions?
Exactly right. And it's about leaving no stone unturned. So that was the way it was. I sort of described it when I was a younger athlete. We talk about the concept of marginal gains, which is something I inherited when I first came into cycling. But leaving no stone unturned of the things you have control over to find those small improvements. And so we go back to the first point you made about, as you get closer to your peak, the incremental improvements are tiny. but you can find them if you're prepared to be open-minded and look and not be afraid to change. But equally, you have to change one thing at a time, because if you change the tires on your wheels and you change your aero helmet at the same time, which one worked? You don't know. So you have to prepare and have the time and utilize the competitions. I find that are the training competitions. So the vast majority of the competitions I do are training competitions. They have no material. The result is immaterial. I can utilize those competitions as a really important way to test new things. And to the outside world, no one will know what I'm testing, because it might be the tiniest little adjustment to something. It might even be an adjustment to the nutrition in my race bottle. It might be that I've tweaked my warm up. It might be that I'm trying a different material in my socks, or a different brand, or a different position, the different, tension on my shoes.
Yeah.
There's when you break it down, there's so many different things that you could look at. And I think it's important to recognize. And if you focus on those things, there's an infinite number of things that you do have control over. So then you don't really have the kind of cognitive space to consider, what's my competitor doing? Will it be a weather that I can contend with? Do I need to worry about the time of day? Will I have had enough sleep? And you also have to recognize that you have what you want to happen within your brain. And then you have Dr. Steve Peters, our team support psychologist back in the day, as it were, back sort of 10, 12 years ago, would say you have the emotional side of your brain that's trying to disrupt the path that you've set for yourself. And you recognize that I think Steve says it's you and your mind. Your mind will have a plan, and you personally have a uncompromising plan. And so being able to contend with that sort of parrot on your shoulder telling you you've not had enough sleep, the weather's going to be dreadful, and there's not enough air in your tires, the mechanic's not done the job, you've chosen the wrong fuel for your race bottles, all of those things kind of will be there. And it's how you contend with them, and how much attention you pay to them, and how you settle the nerves and the pressure that you put on yourself. And once you can do that, managing the pressure from external sources is, it's not a piece of cake, but it's much easier.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think it's easier said than done. But yeah, when you mentioned the kind of that subconscious on your brain and your uncompromising objectives, and then your brain kind of clash together. It kind of it can be quite difficult. But as a trained athlete, elite athlete, you train to those to sharpen your mind to be able to deal with that level of complexity when you are put at the extreme level. And you've kind of you've talked us through your approach to how you prepared for competitions. There's a huge kind of longevity in your career. You are. I say it as a compliment, obviously.
Now, I'm not just the mum of the team. I've gone through that phase.
As you are now training to your 9th Olympics, which is in itself is massive. I wanted to to try and understand the driving force that you mentioned earlier on in the conversation. Has there also been any role models, any person that you listened to or looked up to that kind of allowed you to shape your approach to life, to sport?
In terms of longevity, I'm not sure. I think I'm kind of pushing the boundary on, the length of time. I think for me, it's been about sort of snapshots of inspiration from different people all over, all over the different sports that there are. So when I first started swim training, I was completely taken by the approach of Sarah Hardcastle. So single-minded, so capable of kind of enduring this huge workload that's required when you're a swimmer at a young age. And that's where a lot of people who go into swimming struggle, because the demands of swimming at a young age, through your sort of formative years at high school, are really you really have to have a single-mindedness. And so I drew that single-mindedness from watching a documentary about Sarah, watching her compete as a 15-year-old in 1984. But then when I started to compete myself and when I got selected for my first games, I've always watched the athletes around me. And, through 1992, I remember we were at the kitting out session, and the track events were in full swing in Barcelona for the Olympic Games. And I was watching Sally Gonald compete and win the gold medal. And then you work your way through each games, and there's always kind of a pinpoint in Atlanta, watching Steve Redgrave, Matt Pinsent win their gold. But then as I was preparing to compete, one of my closest friends won a gold medal. She won the first gold medal at the Atlanta Paralympics. And she and I have been good mates a long, long time. And watching someone that almost like a sister, succeed and realize their dreams is equally as inspiring. And never was that more powerful than when I was in Tokyo and we couldn't watch anybody in person. You were basically put into your room, and you stayed there for fear of being a contact of someone with COVID. So I just watched the live stream of all the other athletes competing, and watching the wheelchair rugby team win their gold medal was just incredible. But then you wind it back a few years, and I've competed alongside my husband. So being able to watch that and then realize that I needed to play my part in the household medal tally. So I think, it's one of the huge, I guess, privileges of being an athlete and rubbing shoulders with the best in the world on a regular basis. Reminding yourself that you are doing that is really important, because you could become complacent by how much excellence you're surrounded by.
Yeah, interesting. So it seems like you are using several key moments, looking up to other athletes that are performing alongside you and looking for as a kind of inspiration, that feel inspired through them, which I guess it would be perhaps quite natural. But also you are in a way sort of grounding yourself to correct me if I'm wrong, but is that you're grounding yourself so that you can see, yes, I have the ability, but I need to commit myself to achieve this record or win this competition, because just the talent won't be enough to get there. Is that what you meant by what you were saying?
Well, yeah, definitely. I mean, there's never been a question that it's talent that gets you where you go. You have to work hard. Like, we all know someone who was uber talented at school, but didn't have the commitment to training and saw the training as a sacrifice they had to make in order to be good, and therefore were prepared to make it. And I firmly believe that you're not making sacrifices, you're making choices. And once you start to think, and I think that's probably one of the crucial parts to being able to manage this over a long period, is that the people who talk about having made sacrifices tend not to have the length of career that perhaps others do, because they suddenly realize, well, I resent the fact I'm having to make this sacrifice and I don't want to make it anymore. And whereas I've always seen it as a choice, so I've had to make some difficult choices, and some people might define that as a sacrifice, but it was still my choice. So, for example, a friend of mine was getting married in May 2007, and I couldn't make the hen do, so because I was competing overseas, and I sent a doll that looked like me on the hen do instead. And the doll had so much fun. I was a bit gutted. But you do things differently to kind of make sure that people realize that they're not less important. It's just that there's something that has had to take priority at that point. Or, for example, the World Championships were in Rio in 2018, and it was a requirement that everyone had the yellow fever vaccine due to an outbreak in Rio. And that hadn't been the case. Course, well, it hadn't been the case for the Games in 2016. It had been an outbreak that started in 2017, and it's continued, in fact, because there is an event there at the end of March, and people are having to have the yellow fever vaccine. And I had just had another baby. Well, he was 6 months old, and I was due to go to the World Championships, and he would have been 7 months old. And if I wanted to have the yellow fever vaccine, I would have needed to stop breastfeeding, And I wasn't prepared to do that. I wasn't going to risk the health of my baby to go to a competition that was nice to do, but really the priority was him. And so some people say, oh, you sacrificed the world championships. I'm like, well, not really. It was my choice. I had a choice. It was a clear choice there. Yeah. And that was way more important than that. And I think when you frame it in that way, it gives you a sense of control again, which is what we go back to, is there are tricky things that you have to consider. But once you have a decision and you make it and you stick to it, that's you in control of a situation that might otherwise have felt a little bit like it was spiraling away from you.
It's a very good point about making choices. Perhaps as in people in position of leadership, they also have to make those choices of where to take a business, or an elite athlete like yourself, where I want to make the most of my commitment, how do I weigh this? So it's interesting that I particularly liked the fact that you mentioned about the athletes that see it as not a limitation, but as a compromise, tend to have shorter sort of athlete kind of span in terms of their lives as an athlete, which nicely ties into to your longevity in the sport, to the fact that you have chosen to make some choices that allowed you to continue in the sport, continue as an athlete competing at the highest level. And I kind of wanted to there is this line of making choices, making the right choices to achieve a goal. And you are kind of, as you prepare for Paris, the Olympic Games in Paris, you also have your role as an active travel commissioner for Greater Manchester. And I'm interested into understanding how you what motivated to kind of work with local government to become an active travel commissioner, and what is the benefits that bring to you and to the community at large?
No, I think there was a number of different motivations. First of all, the need to go to work to earn the money that pays for the career that you need to do, because the funding is different. There's no prize money in Paralympic sport. There's no bonuses for winning gold medals. Your grant funding is as it is. So it is a contribution to living and training costs. So being able to choose to work in a role that inspires you is the ultimate privilege. And I think for me, having a role that enables me to give back at the same time as being inspired by what it can do is probably kind of that yin and yang a little bit, because I'm working, I like to call it this rainbow of sport, like this whole spectrum, right from getting people moving for the very first time, that, some people have never walked further than the door to the door of a car, the front door of the house to the door of the car. They've never done, there's so many sedentary people who it's difficult to imagine when you're an active person, just how many people within the population don't manage to do 30 minutes of movement every day. Like it seems almost like it might be impossible, but there is a vast majority of people struggle. And we have a population where 66% of people are overweight or obese or morbidly obese, and the health that is so detrimental to long-term health. And for the first time ever in the past few years, the life expectancy of the population has actually declined. So when I first had the opportunity to work, it's dreadful. And when I first had the opportunity to work in active travel, it was with the mayor in South Yorkshire, and the opportunity to provide the experience I have. I studied sport and exercise science with a huge focus on health and well-being and how activity equated to good health. So I'd already studied this at university, and it was something I'd sort of had my eye on, but I didn't know how to kind of best express it. And this role really encompasses all of those things: reducing the number of people who are likely to be diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, promoting exercise as a form of medicine, if you like. If it was a pill, everyone would want to take it because it has an instantaneous effect. And 10 minutes walking a day for someone who's sedentary has immeasurable positive consequences if you could move for just 10 minutes and then gradually build yourself up. And no one's expecting you to go from 0 to hero in the space of a week. But it's possible to make some really big changes to people's lives. And I have an experience from my own having to build myself back up again after chronic fatigue syndrome, after having horrendous chest infections and being in the point of post-viral fatigue. And those are the closest I've come to having a sedentary life, not through choice, and having to start with 5 minutes a day. It's kind of like, it was so frustrating. But when you know what you have to do to build yourself back up again, you can empathize with the people who really struggle to know where to start. And if we can enable people...
It's quite important, yeah.
Yeah, enable people to move without having to make an appointment with an exercise class, that builds it into their life and enables them to do it eventually without thinking. But it's that choice initially of not taking the car for that very short trip to the shop where you're just picking up a pint of milk and going home again. And the number of people who still drive less than a kilometre for those sorts of errands is quite stark. And so it was a motivation that allowed me to do a number of different things, and it's gradually grown and then allowed me to move back home into Greater Manchester and really pick up on a much bigger population with a very different approach to the public transport system as well.
Yeah, so for people that spend a lot of their time sitting down at work or have mobility difficulties, being able to just get out of be able to just walk for 10 minutes, the exponential growth in terms of their well-being, their health, it's immense. Only perhaps for you, 10 minutes walking is nothing. It doesn't make any difference.
Well,
it probably
right
just
now,
tires you out.
Yeah, right now, 10 minutes doesn't touch the sides. But if you're someone who struggles with mobility, and we're not talking about walking, if that involves a wheelchair, that's the same. Being outside in fresh air, having access to fresh air is something most of us take for granted, but it's not something that everybody does have access to. And we have a very, like you say, indoor lifestyle, particularly in the winter in Northern Europe. And the number of people deficient in things like vitamin D is really high. And that has an ongoing sort of a knock-on effect to bone health, to brain development in children. The numbers of people being diagnosed with osteoporosis, particularly an affliction for women mainly due to the hormone changes in midlife. All of those things matter. And being able to add activity. And it was interesting listening to Sarah Jarvis, who's a Radio 2 doctor, just been diagnosed with osteoporosis, promoting activity and saying, yes, there's a risk that you might fall. But if you're careful, the benefit of that walk far outweighs the risk of not doing it at all. Mm-hmm. And that enables your bones to have a little bit of something to help them to degenerate less quickly.
Yeah, exactly. It not only improves your health, there's massive benefits to being able to be more active. So that's kind of that that vision that you're working towards is to get the wider population to just be able to walk, have
a choice for their journeys.
The possibilities. Have a choice. So I'm interested into how is that applied then to school children, that parents that face the fear of allowing their children to give them the freedom to ride their bikes to school because they will be driving on traffic and there's not enough segregated bike lanes. How do you see that your work positively impacting on mitigating perhaps the fear of parents?
No, it's a very valid fear, and I have the same for my children. And so there's two parts to it really. The first part is trying to build the infrastructure, trying to working with the local authorities to give them all of the facts and figures and ultimately the funding to make the decisions of the difficult choices. Because if you've got a 2-lane highway, you've got competing modes of transport. The least important in that space should be motor vehicles. Buses should have priority. People on bikes, walking should have priority. But because our public transport system isn't good enough yet, the private vehicles, the cars, the private hire vehicles, all of those things have to be accommodated, and it's making the choices at the right time. So they're going in Greater Manchester. There's a phase of phasing in of bus franchising to bring buses back under public control, and after a phase of that bedding in and more services becoming available, then the choices people can make will hopefully have been shifted, and less space will be needed for vehicles. Some people refuse to get the bus, and you need to make driving much more expensive. I think if you look at the cost of driving, it's far more subsidised than any public transport, and it's been protected by the fuel duty being frozen for a number of years now, possibly even more than 10. So all of those things were subsidised driving because our public transport system isn't good enough. Our public transport system isn't good enough because we have made it too expensive. It's not been well funded. So it's a bit of a chicken and egg. So whilst it's about building the infrastructure, that can take time because of those difficult decisions, and it can be a catch-22 because you haven't got a good enough transport system, so people have to drive, and you can't fund it sufficiently, so people still drive. So in parallel to that, we have to work on the way that our roads are being used by people. And within Greater Manchester, we're hoping that by the end of 2024, a Vision Zero strategy for the region will have been adopted. And if you can make roads and people using those roads behave more considerately to each other, if you can enable people to make the right choices, to be aware of their surroundings and their responsibility as a driver within that space, it starts to lower vehicle speeds. It starts to give people confidence that the other people around them care about your children as much as you care. And that is obviously a huge ask. We need all of society to buy into the concept that we're looking after each other and that everybody's journey is just as important. When you see a high volume of pedestrians on the footway, your response as a driver should instantly be to slow down in case one of those pedestrians
slow down,
But that is, we've prioritised the motor vehicle for such a long time. It's almost ingrained in people to not even think about anything that isn't in that tunnel vision ahead of them. And that's not really how you're taught to drive. And habits like mirror, signal, manoeuvre are forgotten. And all of these antisocial behaviours affect the space, and like you say, affect a parent's choice as to whether or not they have to drive their child to school, can even allow them to get the bus, because antisocial behaviour doesn't just exist behind the wheel. Personal safety is a big barrier too.
Yeah, that's very important. What you just said is an important message. Changing behaviors in people in society is something that takes time. It's not kind of immediate, and particularly now that Manchester has been nominated as the European capital for cycling or of cycling. It's kind of perhaps there is some momentum behind the work that you've been doing to educate and create a positive impact in the communities within Greater Manchester.
If we focus on the opportunity that cycling brings, the workforce productivity of just being that little bit more active, about the importance of moving differently, I think it really helps people to realise that that some of the clickbait style headlines are not the ones to follow. The ones about the positive news is really where we should be heading. And the more consensus we can get behind the simple form of a bicycle or a tricycle, enabling everybody to move, because of course not everybody can drive. Some people with medical conditions are not allowed to drive, so they need their space too. Some people are choosing not to drive. People are choosing to learn to drive later. And quite often you hear someone saying, well, I've had to learn to drive because I don't have another choice. And that's heartbreaking, really, because so many students, people, I don't need to learn to drive. I can get around to university. I can get to work locally. But then they move further out, or they have an opportunity to work, and suddenly they need to learn to drive because they can't do that job in any other way.
Exactly, yeah.
And that's the thing that we have to get to changing.
Yeah, that's a very true point. Having been in that same position where I'm based in London. In London, you don't need a car to move around. It's very easily. There's a good transport network. But I've lived outside London in the countryside, and that moving from A to B becomes much more of a difficulty, and that's where we need safety for road users that are not driving a car, also better public transport infrastructure. Can you just share a bit more? You mentioned the Vision Zero for what exactly is that vision? Can you just break it down a little bit so that we understand it?
So Vision Zero is the idea that by a certain date, the collective group of people within the region or within the country will have eliminated all serious injury and road deaths. And it's a concept that started in Scandinavia, and there are a number of cities who have declared for the first time zero serious injuries or deaths within their conurbation. And so a number of different regions within the UK have adopted it. There's no national policy yet. Probably something that does need to change. There hasn't been a national road safety plan in the UK for more than 10 years. There needs to be. And I think even if the date for zero is set in the future, something to work towards, because you can't track and effectively process your data if you don't know where your endpoint is going to be. So in Greater Manchester, as with other parts of the UK, 2040 has been set as the target. It ties into a number of other environmental targets around carbon zero and around zero emission vehicles, or certainly zero emission at the tailpipe. And I think all of those things matter because you can do things in parallel. And so much of the funding that appears to be the barrier to not doing it is actually you're doing stuff already because you're starting to work towards those other targets. So the idea being that with the police force, the fire service, local authorities, businesses, and everyone who's working or living or visiting Greater Manchester recognises that they have a part to play and they are part of a team. And I think that's the thing we need to get to. Society's become a bit fragmented and argumentative, if you like, and we need to get to being a team again. We need to look after each other and recognise that we can all be competitive and get on and grow old and do our things ambitiously, but we still need to do that with a respectful sort of approach to everybody who's around us.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think when I think of road users, it kind of breaks it down into almost tribalistic movements where you have car. I mean, I drive, I ride my bicycle, I walk. So, but you do have kind of tribalistic movements where people driving will, the road is for them, so they don't see any other user as worthy of using that same space as they are using. But this seems to be a societal shift where kind of through the ages, the pedestrians, horse riders, bicycle users, there's always the priority and the kind of how people have more dominance, or if you will, a different way to put it is that they saw themselves as kind of having more rights to the space, kind of shifted. And as you've been saying, and the shift to the car has been more prominent over the last decades. And as we are now seeing in kind of working towards more net zero, vision zero, keeping a sustainable level of life that kind of allows us to extend a bit more our life here in the planet Earth, not for just for us, but for the future generations, is kind of that needs to shift again, that paradigm of cars being the only choice, rightful users.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
And the idea of choice is so important here, because people say, oh, well, it's all a bit fluffy. And it's like, well, no, it's not really. If you don't have a choice, you're trapped. If you don't have the opportunity to move in the way that's most effective for your budget and for the day that you're having and for the purpose of your journey, then you're being railroaded into making a choice that isn't yours to make, that you don't really want to have to make. And it's that everyone is, no one is everything. No, there's no one mode that everybody sticks to, or it would appear. It's just a small minority of people who only drive, and those are the people that have the loudest voices. that seem to affect the decision makers more. And you'll see this with the removal of some really great opportunities to promote walking, cycling and wheeling. Suddenly there's an about turn, it would appear, and things get removed because a very small lobby of aggressive people who drive, and that's it, have made a decision on behalf of everyone else. And most schemes receive, more than 3/4 of the people are not opposed to them. They're not necessarily sure of what's happening, but they want to see an improvement to the current status quo.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's the loud minorities. It's a consequence of what society we live in. Is like the loud minorities seem to have a lot of media space, but in fact, most of the populations, a large proportion of the population, doesn't see it like that.
Exactly.
So yeah, it's trying to speak to the kind of sideline, perhaps, if I may say, to the loud minority and focus on the common interest of the larger percentage of people. That's a lot of food for thought here, because it's important. It's an important discussion to be had, because we are all part of the discussion, whether we like it or not. We are all part of the cities we live in, and we have the rightful use of it. I wanted to kind of shift perhaps the kind of the focus here, because I wanted to bring us back to kind of the vision for Paris 2024, because I mean, you first of all, can you please share like what kept you going? Like why? I mean, this might sound like a very almost rude question to ask of an elite athlete, like why do you want to go for another Olympic Games? But I think coming from a point of curiosity, let's say, what was the vision or the ambition here?
Well, I've got quite used to people asking me, probably for the last 20 years, when are you going to retire? So anyone who asked me that, I think actually after Tokyo, it was the one time very few people did, because they knew the answer was probably going to be, leave me alone. I'll make my decisions when I make my decisions. But after Tokyo, I came home and I'd had to spend 22 nights away from Charlie, who had just he was still 3. He didn't understand where I'd gone and he thought I'd left forever. And he was absolutely devastated every time I left the front door that I might be going for another 22 days. And I said, do you want Mummy to stop doing this? Because I have the choice to do what I want now. And he said, no, I want to see you race in Paris. I don't want you to leave me behind again. And I realized that, I absolutely love riding on the road and training outside, and it provides me with an incredible balance. So yes, it's hard work. No one's disputing the fact that you have to make tough decisions and you have to work hard and have to be uncompromising. And you have to have a really solid plan and know what things you're going to adjust and improve. But those things, I'm well rehearsed with those things. So it wasn't like I was having to learn something new. It was just also an opportunity to go into an unknown area. There aren't that many female athletes or male athletes that compete beyond, the early mid-40s. I think, one of my heroes from Rio and Beijing and London, Kristen Armstrong, she won 3 gold medals in a row in the time trial, which is one of my, probably the most favorite event I have. And she was 43 or nearly 43 in Rio. And I realized it would be nearly 43 had Tokyo gone ahead when it was planned. So I'd already had that, okay, yeah, it's possible. And then there was this wondering, this curiosity, well, what does happen to you in your mid-40s? What happens to you as you're approaching your 50s? Is it still possible to improve? I found that answer out the other day, by the way. The answer is yes. I did a power PB for 5 minutes. And it's kind of like...
Wow, congratulations. Wow.
Yeah, absolutely. I just think there's so many things that if you're curious and I've never been the sort of person who needs to avoid failure. There are 2 types of athletes, arguably. The ones that try to avoid having to make a mistake or putting themselves out there, and the ones that need to achieve. and I've always needed to achieve. I've not been afraid to race and test things. And so I've not been afraid to do a training session in case it goes wrong. And I think it's really important and that's been a key part of the last, nearly 3 years, has been that idea that it's another opportunity. I've been gifted another 3 years, if you like, by the want of my little boy who, turning something so desperate for him at the time into something positive. And I have the privilege to do that and try. And if I don't make it and I don't succeed, there's no shame in having tried. There's literally no expectation that I even get on the start line, let alone anything else. And I think that's the beauty of this. I've found a path that I'm really comfortable with being uncomfortable in.
Yeah, that's a very good way of phrasing it, being comfortable in the uncomfortable. But it's kind of in that answer, you concisely kind of reveal your mindset of making you seem very happy in your choices, even though those choices might bring you short-term pain and discomfort. But you seem very happy with those choices.
Yeah, pain. There's a bit of a saying, isn't there? Pain is temporary and something else is forever. Like your happiness is forever. Yeah. I mean, it doesn't have to always be glory, but it's that knowing. And if you sit down as an old, you're a long time retired. Matt Pinson once very wisely said to me, "You're a long time retired, Sarah, so don't rush the decision." And I can't remember which games I was talking to him after, but it's so true. And I've held on to that really, because you are so long retired and you sort of look at we talked about lifespan actually reducing, but you look at what you hope your lifespan might be and think, well, how many more years, am I going to be happy for sitting for 20, 30 years thinking, I wonder if I'd made the right decision?
Exactly, yeah.
And someone said to me, oh, well, yeah, but what happens if you lose your last race? I was like, nothing.
Tried.
Just tried. And it was interesting because that particular athlete, I've always thought you've limited yourself with what you can do because you've had that mindset. And I didn't really have the right response at the time to say it doesn't matter. I just went, sort of shrugged. I suppose it's the same thing, isn't it? Saying it doesn't matter. I've tried. And you're not going to be, if people think less of me for not winning every race, that's got more to do with them than it has to do with me.
Yeah, for sure. That's brilliant. So I kind of wanted to wrap this because there's loads of nuggets here, and I want to wrap it here. And maybe there's a few questions that I want to ask, and so the first one is I want to wrap all of what you said perhaps in one answer, which is, what does success look like to you? And you probably have already answered this in many, many ways, but throughout our conversation. But if you can give a kind of a concise answer.
Yeah. Well, don't judge success only by the outcome, by how you respond to the hurdles that you face along the way, because it's not just about what happens at the end of a journey. It's about each interaction that you make or each decision that you make along that path.
Very good. Yeah. Wise words, because it's like the journey and celebrating the small gains, the small...
Well, the journey is most of what you're doing.
Yeah.
The end point is a really small amount of time. And depending on the event that you do, or, whether you're presenting at a conference or whether you're trying to win a bid or whatever it is in success looks like in somebody's line of work, it's the end bit where you have to perform is always the smallest part. That the work and the preparation is the lion's share of what determines that outcome. So if you make the good decisions or you make the bad decisions and learn from them, you take those responsibilities. That's why you judge success, because if the outcome is just a little bit short, you know that you've succeeded with 95% of your journey. You know what you're going to change next time if you choose to take it on another time.
Exactly. You just have to make sure that you have the right mindset to be able to recognize that maybe there was some things that
you have to
failings
take responsibility.
So and then you adjust for future.
And so many people don't take responsibility. They externalize the problem, and there will be external factors that need considering. But there's always something that you can take responsibility for, even if you never voice it. You can take responsibility internally and talk to yourself about it. You don't ever have to But it's always better when you watch somebody being interviewed after a race and they've blamed everyone else in the stadium apart from themselves. You think, not sure I believe you. And actually, if they just said one thing about what they could personally change, it would have changed the whole interview.
Right mindset takes you a long way. Yeah. So we kind of I've started a tradition in the podcast, which is every guest leaves a question for the guest, not knowing who they are. So this question was left for you, and I'll read it. What piece of advice or guidance have you been given that has helped shape your life?
Why do you need to be ordinary when you can be extraordinary?
Wow. Okay, that is.
I was 16 when a swimming coach said that when I was 16, and I've never forgotten it. And I held that through to my second games, where I felt enormous pressure from everybody to be a teenage wonder kid for a second time in a row. And he was just so profound. And there's no process behind that. There's just this mindset, this idea that you can trust yourself. You've done the work, and don't be ordinary, just be extraordinary. And I think it's a bit of a soundbite, but I think it's just stuck with me. And if ever I'm at a loss of what to say, that works.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's very concisely encapsulates the fact that you have to take ownership of who you are, the work you've been putting in, and owning it, and just not conforming to other people expectations of you are, or what you set your own limits that you set. And like you, as you mentioned several times through the conversations, that you have to have the mindset of allowing yourself to recognize the mistakes, the failings, and learn from them. And that what will make you extraordinary, because you are taking through the journey, you're taking the success of accomplishing something, and alongside that process, you also have learned and became a better human, and kind of everything made you even better as a person, rather than just you having to look for a result to recognize your worth. Yeah, very, very, very well put. So now it's your turn to put someone else on the spot. So what question would you like to leave to my next guest?
I guess I've answered this. So I guess my question would be, how do you define success? Because I think everybody defines it differently. And I say how you shouldn't define success by only looking at the outcome. But how do you define success? Because I think everybody, when you put everybody's ideas into a melting pot, one idea resonates. Not everybody's going to resonate with my description. So I think it's really important that we hear from as many people as possible how they describe success. And then one of the other things I've also found over my entire career is that you can tweak your outlook according to other ideas, and you bring them in. So a little bit like you might change one thing at a time in terms of a performance plan or an equipment offer that you have. The same thing applies to your mindset. If someone says something somewhere where you think, oh, actually, I really like that, you can adopt it and tweak it to work with your own mindset. And I think that's also vital for people who are, there's lots of faddy things out there. There's lots of gimmicks when it comes to training, lots of hacks. Hacks just don't exist. For me,
do these 5 steps and you'll be better, or you will increase your power threshold, whatever.
Exactly. Yeah. So I think it's there's no way of hacking your way to success. You have to work hard. But how you define success can be quite an interesting place to start, because you're starting at the end point and then you're making a plan to get there ultimately. So yeah, I would ask, how do you define success?
Very good question. Very on brand as well for our podcast, Right to Success. So that's brilliant. Sarah, it has been an immense pleasure talking to you.
Thank you.
I've learned so much. I hope people listening will also have learned quite a lot. I also want to wish you the best of success, however you want to define it, for Paris and for your work with Manchester. So yeah, thank you for coming on the podcast.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's been an honor.
Wow, what a great conversation. This was a masterclass in perseverance, vision, and humility. Dame Sarah Storey's journey is a powerful reminder that success is multifaceted, and genuine achievement lies in our impact on the world and the people around us. Storey's legacy, both on and off competition, will undoubtedly continue to inspire generations to come. Now, before you go, make sure to tune in to next week's podcast where Dame Sarah Storey's question will be answered by my next guest. Until then, please leave us a review and see you next week. Thanks for listening.